Welcome to the Stefan Levira podcast.
Welcome, podcast listeners. Today, our guest is the founder and owner of Upstream Data. His name is Steve Barbour. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, Stefan. Thanks for having me.
Excellent to have you on. Steve, so I've seen a lot of your posts on Twitter and, there's a bit of chatter around your company. And I like some of your perspectives on energy. So I thought it would be a good interview for the listeners to learn a little bit more about you and what you guys are doing at Upstream Data. So maybe you just want to start with a bit of background about yourself and what Upstream Data is.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a mechanical engineer. I've been working in an oil field for the last 8 years or so since I graduated in 2011. But yeah, I was doing production engineering, so producing oil basically here in Canada. I live in Alberta, in a small town. We do heavy oil production. And so I was doing that for a bunch of years. And so I quit that job in 2016 to go start my own company, which was, and I still do this, but it's sort of a product design company related to oil field, like for downhole tools and that kind of thing. It's sort of one of my passions, I guess. And in that time frame, that's when I started Upstream Data as well. I didn't know a lot about Bitcoin at the time. So this is early 2016. I'd heard of Bitcoin, mainly just, I think I probably caught wind of it in the previous bubble in 2013 timeframe, but I never really looked into it at all. So I didn't really know anything about it. But it was in this downtime, when I was in between work, I just quit and I was trying to get this new thing off the ground that I learned about Bitcoin, and I learned about, probably like yourself and a lot of people, I just immediately thought it was really interesting and spent a lot of time learning about it. And it was mining that really attracted me to Bitcoin because I realized pretty much right away when I was reading about mining and how you can just, at the time, just all I really knew about it was you could just plug a computer into any power source and earn money. And that intrigued me because we have this problem in the oil and gas industry of venting and flaring of natural gas. So I started Upstream Data to effectively create a product to solve that problem. So I started Upstream Data I officially started it in 2017 early, and I had been thinking about it basically from mid 16 when I was learning about Bitcoin. It took me a little while to take the plunge and make an investment into it, but so what I do is I realize, mining, and a lot of people are aware that mining is pretty incredible and that you can, any energy source effectively, no matter where it is, has the same value if you apply the same ASIC to it, the same chip efficiency. It doesn't really matter where it's located. You don't need it to be on a grid. It doesn't matter what country it's in, as long as you're mining with the same ASIC, you're going to be making the same amount of value. So this is really cool, and I know guys like Andreas call it energy arbitrage, and so it's a really good solution to oil and gas. Because what I build, and I've only built a few so far, but my first prototype was basically, I call it a HashGen skid, and it's a shipping container. So anyone familiar with mining would already probably be familiar with people that build shipping container Bitcoin mines. They're pretty useful in a sense because they're highly portable. So if you have to move it for whatever reason from one energy source to another, it's pretty useful that way. But with me, I build these things with a power plant inside it, and I move it from oil site to oil site. So if you have an oil well, or a gas well, any natural gas source or any combustible fuel source that can basically power an engine or a turbine, you could mine Bitcoin with it. So that's what I do. I build these portable, I just call them HashGen skids, and I the main purpose is actually to sell them to oil and gas producers because it's really their problem that they're meant to solve, which is the venting and the flaring of well, essentially waste gas, I guess you could call it.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit more about the venting and flaring aspect? Like, why is that a waste? What's the difference between, using your product versus not using your product?
Yeah, for sure. So like, I'll talk to you mostly about like the Canadian oil and gas industry because I'm very familiar with that. But this pretty much applies to any oil and gas industry anywhere in the world. So in Canada, we have a lot of heavy oil reserves. So heavy oil, the difference between heavy oil and conventional oil is the oil is a lot more dense and more viscous. So it's sort of like molasses. It can literally come up from the wellbore like almost like a solid. So being this quality, and also it's in an unconsolidated sand is what we call it. So it's not in like a sandstone, which is like a hard sort of rock-like sandstone. It's in basically loose sand. So when it's produced to surface with a pump, you're pumping sand with the oil emulsion, oil and water. And the reason why that's relevant is because in this industry, we can't use pipelines in heavy oil production when you have all the sand because you can't pump sand down a pipeline. It just packs it off. So you have to pump it on surface, just straight to surface into a tank and let the sand settle out. So the point is that we don't have pipelines like between all of our well sites. I mean, we do on some wells. It depends on the quality of the emulsion, but on the vast majority in heavy oil, we produce into the facility on surface, and then we truck it to wherever it's getting treated. So we don't have pipelines. We don't have a lot of pipelines, and certainly when you produce oil, and this basically applies everywhere in oil and gas, there's a certain amount of solution gas that comes out of solution when the pressure's dropped off the oil. It basically is called the bubble point pressure, but the gas breaks out and separates. In our case, it separates as it's produced up the tubing. The casing gas comes up the casing side, and so what is happening today, I guess the state of the art certainly in Canada, is actually there's a fair amount of venting. So there's quite a large amount of venting actually. I was doing I did a presentation recently and I quantified it. It's on some of the regulators' websites, but an equivalent, I can't remember the volume, but an equivalent value at like $2 per gigajoule, it's like $700 million a year. So it's quite a bit of money, even at low value gas. So these companies, nobody wants to vent methane. It's not really ideal. It's pretty bad for the environment. To be specific, it's considered 25 times worse than if you combust it. So what I mean by that, is 1 kilogram of, let's say, methane vented into the atmosphere is equivalent to 25 kilograms of CO2. And that's there's something called a global warming potential scale. It's a 100-year time frame, but it's just really bad to vent methane. It just has a really high capacity to hold heat in the atmosphere. So a lot of oil companies they'll try to, it's all about economics, right? But when they can, we'll conserve it. Like we'll put a pipeline in, get it to a market somewhere. But in a lot of cases, that's just not viable. So the second best option is to combust it, like just burn it. And that's where you see, one of the symbols for the oil and gas industry is the flare. And that's really what's happening in a lot of cases. But flares are also used at facilities for other reasons. But a lot of the time at upstream oil wells, all the gas is just flared off, like in the shale oil plays in the northern U.S. Like when they frack these tight reservoirs, they produce a lot of gas, and a lot of time they just flare it off because they can't get a market to it. So my solution is effectively, I try to work with these oil producers, and I build and I fabricate and sell these skids that'll, I mean, and the skid itself, all it is it's a natural gas engine, which anyone in this industry is already familiar with. And it's just tied into electrical infrastructure to power ASICs.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about then how so basically it gives them the option of instead of that, it does what?
Yeah. So for example, I have one customer. So the way it is in Canada, there's a certain amount of gas you're allowed to vent, like compliantly with regulations. And then if you're over that volume, you're non-compliant, and you effectively have to shut your well in. So there's an economic cost there. You have to shut it in, or you have to do something like conserve it or combust it. So I have one customer right now. I'm moving a skid there next week. They're not sure yet about investing in like a Bitcoin skid, but they're really interested in trying it out and seeing how it works, and just seeing if, I guess, just trialing the viability. But effectively, so they have a site. I'm told it's venting around 800 cubic meters of gas per day. I'm not sure what that is off the top of my head in standard in cubic feet, but it's a fair amount, and it's they're allowed to. On this site, they're only allowed to vent 500 cubes a day, and that's all you're allowed to do. That's the rules in Alberta. I live right on the border with Alberta and Saskatchewan, so in Saskatchewan the rules are a little different. But so what this skid will basically, the engine will consume the gas. I'll just tie it in. It's the skid is fully like it's plug and play, I guess is what I call it. Like it has everything you need to start mining. Like it has a network connection. All you got to do is plumb in the gas, and the gas goes through the gas tree. So basically through some regulators into the engine. Engine consumes it, and the engine is loaded up with Bitcoin ASICs. So I can control the rate of gas consumption by how much I load the engine up. So if I want to, I have a certain max limitation on what I have in these skids right now, which is up to 130 kilowatt. So I can basically power up to 130 kilowatt. The one I'm moving to his site next week is only 75 kilowatt, but that'll do about, like, it depends on the gas quality, like the heating value of the gas, but it'll consume approximately like 700 to 800 cubes a day. So it should pretty much it should take all of his excess gas and consume all of it. And if I find that it's consuming too much, or I don't have enough gas to run all the miners I put out there, I can just take some miners off and redeploy it elsewhere. So it's
right. Okay.
It's like, the right way to think about it, it's just a form of combustion that is actually doing something useful. Whereas if they didn't do this, they would have to basically, because they're non-compliant, they'd either have to shut the well in or like slow it down, because if you slow down your production rate, you'll slow down the gas rate. But that's not good either, because they're losing money by not being as productive. They can either do that, which is losing money, or they can pay for a flare, which is quite a bit of money as well. And so all their options are to lose money. So my option actually has a pretty decent net present value, or at least it all depends where the Bitcoin price goes, but the operating cost is quite low, so it's pretty competitive even in this mining environment, which is really tough right now.
Okay, great. So let's talk about the HashGen. I understand you've had a prototype or a first model of it going for the first year. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I spent the first half of 2016 just thinking about how I wanted to design this thing. I guess my challenge is a little different than what typical, because like at the time I was doing everything. I was new to Bitcoin mining, and I was trying to learn everything I could about it, scouring like Bitcoin talk forums and that kind of thing. And there were some people, like I said, doing some mining in CCANs. So the challenge I had is I also have an engine in there which produces a lot more heat than the load than it's powering, because engines are generally pretty inefficient at that 25 to 30% thermal efficiency. So had to also deal with engine heat. So I spent the first part of 2016 just contemplating and thinking about how I wanted to design my first skid, and especially because I'm pretty much on my own on this. I do have a partner who's sort of a silent partner, but other than that, it's been fully bootstrapped by myself. I wanted to make sure that I didn't screw it up the first time. So yeah, the first like few months, 2016 or 2017, I was in the design phase, and then had a design done, I think, by June, and I ordered the equipment, and I got the first prototype built and mining in early October. So just in time for the real bull run to really start going. So the skid was it was, I live in mid to northern Alberta. It gets pretty cold here. We had days actually on Christmas Day. It was down to minus 40 degrees Celsius. So definitely a bit of a challenging environment for mining, but the skid is pretty well designed. Like, I have it designed such that I can use the heat from the engine in the winter to preheat the air for the ASICs, and then in the summer when it's hot, I can just direct vent out the engine heat so it doesn't preheat the air. But yeah, no, it was actually pretty surprised at how reliable it ran. Aside from like general engine maintenance issues, like belts or spark plugs might go, and your routine oil changes and that kind of stuff. Other than that, like, there was certainly a stretch there in the winter. I probably didn't have to go out to site a single time in like 3 months. I just called a mechanic to go do an oil change. He did it, and I can also completely shut down and configure everything in the skid remotely. I can even turn on and off circuits and everything like that. So even if there's a hardware failure or something in an ASIC, I can just do a hard reset on the circuit. With this prototype, I really wanted to have, I call it like my Cadillac version. Like, I wanted to have it, I wanted to be able to do everything with it remotely, as a proof of concept, but also certainly when you're dealing with oil and gas producers, they do not want to have to call out their guys really ever, like to restart an engine or something like that, because certainly on occasion what can happen is like the casing gas line, like the line feeding the engine, can freeze off, and you get your inflow choked, so your engine can go down and that kind of thing. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't a burden on anybody, especially for this prototype, when it was pre-commercial, I guess you could say. So yeah, cool. It's around for a year. So I made a little tweet about that recently. It started in October 2017, and it's just about a full year. So yeah, it's been pretty reliable.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So tell us a little bit about what miners you use in the actual skid.
Yeah, well, I'll just use like whatever I consider to be the most profitable ASIC at the time. I mean, the skid itself, you could put anything in there, like any proof of work, GPU miner if you wanted. The way this first one was set up, it wouldn't be that great for that. Just the way I did the shelving, it wouldn't be ideal. But I designed it for like Antminers, that kind of ASIC, and if you look at all the new equipment, they're all standardized around the Antminer design, the profile. So fits really well for that.
Right. So as an example, how many Antminers would you fit in one skid?
The first skid I did, it can do up to 110 kilowatt. The first skid I did, or actually 115. So that is, what is that divided by 1.4? Like 70 odd S9s. I never did max out that first skid, because basically I built a skid to accommodate the biggest engine that I wanted, that I could really fit in there. But also, when I choose engines, like when I'm choosing these power plants, I'm not choosing like one-off power plants that nobody's familiar with. I'm just going with the stuff that everyone's really familiar with and knows how to do maintenance on. So I designed it around what's commonly available. But what I ended up putting in there was I put a small box Chevy in there, which can do only about 45 kilowatt. So I'm still using that small box Chevy at the moment. And I'm actually finding that the small box Chevy, at least for my application, is the ideal engine at this point, just from a cost, from an upfront capital cost per kilowatt perspective.
Right. Okay. Okay, and then how about with getting internet out to the remote location? And I suppose you mentioned earlier that you have to remotely control, you have to be able to remotely control the skid. How do you get reliable internet out there?
Yeah, I just use cell modems right now. So I don't have any redundancy. I just have one single cellular connection. I found that, well, first of all, we're talking about somewhat small scale, like per skid. Like we're only talking the newest skids I'm coming out with. We're looking at like around 90 S9s could probably fit in there, which is still pretty small scale relative to what some other people are doing. So it's not that important to have redundant network, but I do have just a single modem on cellular. It's where we are in oil field, like pretty much most oil well facilities have some kind of communication already, and there's already cell tower infrastructure built for them. So it works really well. You could go with even satellite mining, and you'd have probably a bit more stale shares due to latency, but other than that, cell works quite good.
Okay, cool. And then in terms of the setup of the mining, is it basically so the mining, do you set it up to then pick what pool you want to contribute to, or or do the customers pick that, or how does that work?
Yeah, I only personally do pool mining. Like I don't mine to I don't solo mine or run my own pool. So I've mostly done slush pool, but I've done others like CK pool and the like. I did sell one skid to an oil field customer. He's mining on slush pool. Slush pool is just it's very user friendly, especially for like a new or brand new guy like the guy who recently bought one. So it's pretty suitable for that, and the profitability there is still quite good. They seem to have decent luck, but yeah, just pool mining at the moment for sure.
Yeah, okay. And then the economics wise, what's the model? Is it like a flat rate for the skid, or is it a renting model? And who kind of owns the hashes, let's say? Do you own those, or do the customer own those?
Yeah, there's a few ways I can do it. Like I recently took off my website. Like I was advertising, I was hosting. I had a lot of people inquire about that, especially when the price was on the uptick. And even recently, I've been getting a lot of inquiries. I'm finding though right now I'm not going to offer that just because I'm not really at scale to. There's a lot of overhead when you're dealing with multiple customers and that kind of thing. So in terms of first and foremost, like the product, the HashGen skid it's a solution for the oil company. So they have a problem with their gas vent. So it's a solution for them. So first and foremost, I'm here to build and sell it to them. I basically have pre-designs made, and I can do custom designs. So I can build basically to fit whatever facility they have. And even if they want to go much larger scale, I can easily do that as well. So first and foremost, it's actually just to be a service provider to an oil company. However, what I'm finding is it's to like a lot of these oil and gas, a lot of people in this industry are pretty disconnected from like the Bitcoin industry and crypto. To some degree, there's some people I've met that are relatively knowledgeable, and they've heard of Bitcoin, they have an idea what it is about. And there's other people that have a very negative opinion of Bitcoin. They sort of, I don't know, they've made their mind up already that it's not for them, or it's sort of scammy. I've had conversations with all types of people now. But what I do also offer, aside from offering a product, like I mentioned that I have this one site that I'm putting it on their site at no cost to them. They don't have to pay for the skid, but they're going to just give me their fuel for free because their fuel is wasted anyway. They're just venting it. So I'm able to fix their venting problem And in consideration for that, they're happy to give me the fuel for free. So it works out that way too.
Oh, okay, very nice. So, in a sense, you can kind of go there and have this sort of symbiotic relationship with the oil and gas companies. So, tell us a little bit about the challenges. Then, I think you touched on that before, but let's talk about some of the challenges you faced of working with oil and gas companies and perhaps getting them interested in using this service or interested in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think the main challenge is, okay, so certainly the oil and gas industry for the last several years has been coming through a bit of a recession or a downturn. Canada more than many. Our our prices are terrible, just due to bottlenecks in our pipelines and a bunch of reasons that I won't get into. But so when I approach these guys and I talk about what we do, and it's always this, especially when it's the first time I'm talking to these people, it's the first part is always just about educating on what mining is, how it's. I try to try to give them a bit of my enthusiasm, get them interested in Bitcoin because I see it as such an amazing, powerful thing. And then it's always we talk about economics, right? So right now, to ask or for an oil company to contemplate spending a decent chunk of change on something that is unprecedented, like they've never heard of something like this. They don't have any idea what Bitcoin is, and let alone what mining is, and no one has ever approached them to mine Bitcoin in these skids. So it's definitely a huge learning curve for every single person that I talk to. But I generally get two reactions. Like I usually get a lot of interest because once you start explaining Bitcoin to people and you can explain it the right way, I think it really starts to engage people, and they just ask question after question. It's certainly there's other types that have already sort of dismissed Bitcoin as being like wasteful or just being not useful and sort of a fad, and those people are harder to get through. And honestly, I don't try as hard with those people because it's just a lot of work, a lot of effort. I just try to focus on the people that seem more interested. But certainly pretty much everybody, when I actually show them the economics numbers, they go wide-eyed because the price of gas in Canada right now, like these guys, what they're making on their gas is anywhere between, it depends on the time of year, but it's been on average like $1 to $2 Canadian per gigajoule, or that's about the same per MCF. And that's not very much money. That's why nobody's spending any money in gas in this country. And then when I show them what they would earn if they use that same amount of gas to mine Bitcoin, even considering a conservative estimate on engine efficiency and that kind of thing, it's much, much higher. And I actually publish a graph on my website that I update once in a while. My website's terrible, by the way, but I update it once in a while, and just to show what the recent numbers are like. And even now, when mining is literally at its lowest profitability it ever has been, at least in terms of like dollars per kilowatt earned, it's still pretty lucrative, and these skids pay themselves off in a decent amount of time, especially when you consider the secondary benefits they're getting, like compliance, and they can continue producing the well and all that stuff.
Yeah. So the idea is that you build the skid for them, and it then exists permanently for them at their site, or is it like a temporary thing?
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah, that's a good question, because the nature of especially this heavy oil industry is you can have like the best well, the most like profitable oil well, like in your arsenal, right? Like it can be making a lot of oil, be very prolific, and then out of nowhere, it just goes to zero. It starts producing all water. We call it watering out in this industry, and it's very common to happen dramatically, like instantly. Like we're not talking like days transition, but like from 100 to zero, like just like that. So when that happens, now the well is no longer productive, and usually if they recomplete the well to find another producing formation. But a lot of times there's nothing else there, so they have to shut the well in. And that's actually the beauty of this skid. Like the whole point of the skid was meant to be portable plug and play. You put it on a well site, you mine there as long as you can, and as long as it's beneficial to do so. And then as soon as the opportunity goes away, like as soon as the well is less productive, or you have another well that needs it more, you can move it to the next site. And these things, I just pick them up on a tilt deck truck, or you can use like a picker crane. But a tilt deck truck costs very little per hour, and you can just pick it up with one driver, move it to the next site, drop it off, plumb it in. It's really, really good that way.
Right, so it's very portable, and I think that's very in line with some of the other, Bitcoiners who've spoken about this idea of using, energy that's trapped and kind of, in a sense, using this to go and mine and use that energy. So yeah, let's talk a little bit generally then about, energy mining. What are some of your thoughts? Just what's your background in terms of free market energy?
I would say I have no background.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm a Bitcoin and a Bitcoin mining enthusiast. So I've learned a lot over the last while from from just saying stuff on Twitter and then being corrected and then learning. That's my main mechanism of learning, actually.
Excellent. No, I think that's how many of us learn.
Yeah.
So. It's interesting because one of your tweets, it's you can't say energy is wasted when the market is paying for its use. All energy dissipates to heat. It is only wasted when nobody pays for it. So what's going behind that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like the what I foresee anyway is being like, you see it already. Like there's a lot of people, even people that have been in the space for a while, that are, I wouldn't call them Bitcoiners, but they're people that have been promoting the mining is wasteful narrative. There's plenty of those people already, and mainstream media or just media in general have latched onto that a little bit. I saw several articles on that, like over this last bull cycle, and now that we're in a bear cycle, you just don't see as much posted about Bitcoin these days. But I surely would expect, like when we enter this next bull run and everyone's going bonkers over Bitcoin again, I do expect some anti-Bitcoin people to really latch on to this form of social attack, I guess you could say. But it's the idea that Bitcoin mining is wasteful. It's pretty much a fallacy as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, that tweet, like what I'm basically talking about, like for me as a mechanical engineer, what I think is wasteful is when you have a potential energy source and it dissipates. Just think about these engines I run, like they're running at 25 to 30% efficiency, probably closer to that 25 actually. And so 75% of that power, or that potential power in that gas, is literally wasted. It just turns into heat. It's just combusted and vented out the exhaust. That to me is waste. The energy actually used to mine Bitcoin isn't wasted, and that's where you gotta talk about like subjective value. Like what is waste? If someone is paying for something, if someone finds something useful, then who are you to say that's wasted? Whatever that is. I mean, there's no other way but to say that whatever you think about that is a subjective opinion. So I pretty much feel that for me, the definition of waste is potential energy that literally dissipates to heat. That's waste. Nothing got any use out of it at all. No human being, no organism, nothing. Yeah. So if someone's willing to pay for something, that you can't really say that it's wasted. But I mean, other people have written some good stuff on this, like Eric Voskuil. I have no idea if I say his last name right. He has something called the energy waste fallacy on Bitcoin. Which goes into a bit more detail, and I just don't see how you can consider it wasted when, like, examples for like what I'm doing, and there's other, all the hydro miners out there, for example, they're using low utility energy, like energy that doesn't have much value. It's a lot of that energy is actually just diverted down the river. Like it's energy that's not even used. And so all this surplus, like Bitcoin mining, it's just so competitive. It always seeks out the lowest cost of energy, which happens to be surplus energy sources. And obviously, I'm an example of a case where we're talking about energy that has zero market. Like we're bringing a market to energy that is completely wasted. So yeah, I think the energy waste argument is a complete fallacy, and I don't know. Some people need to educate themselves on that, I think.
Yeah, and it tends to be the sort of people who, they don't necessarily have much consistency between these arguments that they make and then their own actions in their personal lives, because they might, for example, are they the type of person who would refuse to fly ever and try to, truly minimize their use of energy?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the industry I'm in Bitcoin mining and the oil and gas industry, so I get it from both sides. Like, there's a lot of people out there, bashing on fossil fuels, but like they're they're doing it as like their home is like heated through like natural gas, or they're, in the comfort of their home, right? Or like they're using infrastructure built upon fossil fuel products. There's a lot of hypocrisy out there. Like I think a lot of people certainly they like to talk the talk, but they don't really walk the walk. Like they're happy to use all the infrastructure that's built off of layers upon layers of manufacturing and materials that come from oil and gas and fossil fuels. So yeah, it's sort of just related to Bitcoin mining. I mean, I just don't see how people can say that something is wasteful and then turn around, and get on, like, drive their car. Like, you can't say fossil fuels are bad and then drive a car and use fossil fuel derived products like clothing and all that stuff. So yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of hypocrisy out there for sure.
Yeah, and one other thing that's really interesting is basically the argument around fossil fuels. I think people they haven't thought about this the right way. I'm not sure if you've read this, Steve, but there is an argument by Alex Epstein. It's called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. So that was a book he wrote. And one of the key arguments, and I think it'll probably resonate with you, is that we need fossil fuels because they are cheap, reliable, and scalable. And the other thing that he was pointing out is that actually, if you look at human history, it's actually that when we use more energy, it's that we have more comfortable lives, people live longer, they have better access to healthcare, better access to all these other things. And I think that's probably something that resonates with you as you're a guy in the energy industry. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the history of like humanity is like ever increasing in like advanced technology, and when you use advanced technology, we're constantly putting more load on the environment. Like, you look at somebody who's a hunter gatherer like many years ago, they're not using much technology, and their load on the environment is like somewhere equivalent to whatever their metabolic rate is, right? Like whatever energy is burned in their body on a given day is really all the load they're putting on the environment. So I personally look at things like how many kilowatt hours are you burning? Like that's what your load is on the environment. And every single one of us in the first world, like especially like we're using infrastructure that uses massive amounts of energy. Like even just using using your phone, like there's so many layers of infrastructure that make that work. So even though you might feel like you're being green, like sipping tea in Starbucks, like you're still like using many layers of infrastructure for sure. So I mean, I think it's only going to really continue. And in terms of like the fossil fuel thing, like the reason fossil fuels are used and they're cheap and it's just so useful. Like fossil fuels are a great way. Well, it is stored energy, it's potential energy. I mean, all construction projects are basically used on diesel and other fossil fuels. Like the power density of fossil fuels is just enormous. There's this whole, meme on the internet that like electric cars are taking over and that kind of thing. And I really don't see it yet. Like I personally think electric cars are way better performing than fossil fuel vehicles, but like the utility of the electric car isn't quite there yet. And of course, like a lot of the energy that's generated to power these cars right now is fossil fuel based energy. And I think when you zoom out, like, it's just the technology isn't there yet, and it'll be adopted when the costs are in line. And certainly, something's wrong if a technology needs to be subsidized to be used. There's something inherently wrong there. Like, maybe the upfront capital is so intensive that it's just not viable. And you got to realize, like, upfront money spent on something has in it of itself a carbon footprint. So, I mean, just because you're getting subsidized, I don't know, whether it be solar panels or something like that, you got to account for the carbon footprint for that capital spend. And I don't think that's being measured properly. It doesn't seem to be anyway. Like, I certainly don't spend too much time looking at that side of things, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a great comment you make about how some of the infrastructure that many of us use, and if we're not necessarily energy experts or in the energy industry, we're not cognizant of the infrastructure and what it really took to make my smartphone work, to make my computer work, to make my TV work. And I think one example that you brought up is this whole, electric car, Tesla kind of idea. But in reality, if you look at just if you zoom out and look at the actual breakdown of energy, production, a great percentage of that is fossil fuel. So people might, buy a Tesla thinking that they're being more environmental, but not necessarily realizing that they're still using a lot of fossil fuels, and it still requires, say, battery technology and the setup of, the infrastructure. In, say, across America and Canada, I'm sure there are many, many service stations, but that infrastructure would now have to be changed to, Tesla compatible style, refueling stations or re-energizing, whatever they're called, right?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think, like, you look at solar as one. There's a lot of, even like Elon Musk is very bullish on solar. And as far from what I've, I'm certainly no expert on solar, but I've read a little bit about it. And the advances in, like, solar efficiency, like panel technology, haven't really improved a great deal over the last, like, decade or so. Even, we're trying to get it better, and I really hope we do. But we're not quite there yet. And a good way a good way to just see what is viable for power generation, like, a really good way to look at it is see what people are mining Bitcoin off of. Everyone's mining Bitcoin off of hydro right now. Hydro is a great form of energy. It's very, very relatively clean. Obviously, there's some environmental footprint, like, you got to destroy a certain amount of environment just to build the dams and that kind of thing. But overall, it's very, very clean, and that's what people are doing for mining. Nobody's mining on solar. Like, I have seen, like, little pet projects of people mining Bitcoin on solar, but the economics just don't work, because you look at the enormous amount of capital spend that you have to get the panels, and then you have to oversize your infrastructure to, like, I don't know what the numbers are, but, like, you're going to have extra panels to make up more power and store it in a battery. So to have the continuous kilowatt powered by solar is going to be many multiples of one continuous kilowatt powered in something like a small block Chevy natural gas engine, like many orders of magnitude. Like, you can get a small block Chevy doing 45 kilowatt you can get that engine for like 15 to 20,000, no problem. Capital spend up front. The equivalent for, let's say, the same continuous kilowatt from a solar array, even if you're in the best spot on the planet, like, I don't know where that would be, maybe like the Nevada desert or something, it's many multiples higher. So it's not really yeah, I think mining is a good proxy for just looking at, like, what is viable power source. And I think the best way to judge it, like, it's sort of to account for, like, carbon footprints and all that stuff. There's a lot of uncertainties and assumptions made when they make these when they make these calculations. I think one of the best analogous ways of just seeing what has a higher carbon footprint is just compare the net present value of both projects, right? Like, whichever has the higher upfront cost is probably going to have the highest carbon footprint as well. That's the way I look at it. I don't know how accurate that is though, but
And I like this insight. It's basically you're saying capital cost of ASICs is steadily decreasing. This is because OPEX increasingly dominates mining profitability over CAPEX, a function of the ever-increasing difficulty. Mining is decentralizing with time. Can you explain that a little further for people who are newer to Bitcoin mining?
yeah, the point. I guess the point of that tweet is to counter the narrative that some people have been pushing, that mining is has been centralizing and it's getting worse. And there's been some prominent people that I have a lot of respect for, actually, but I disagree with, that want to change. Like, they've suggested we change the proof of work uh, as a means to punish these centralizing entities, like in particular Bitmain, right? Bitmain has dominated mining now for the last several years. But like, I guess the gist of that tweet, like what I'm talking about, is mining is decentralizing with time. And I guess there's a few things to look at there. Like, there's some obvious, like obviously it started off with complete centralization. Satoshi was mining, Hal joined him, then plenty of other enthusiasts started mining Bitcoin. And while I wasn't around in the early days, these very early days, this was pre-price discovery, and I just consider, like, these early days, literally Bitcoin was the definition of an experiment. I think it's sort of, a lot of people say it still is an experiment, but I think it's a little bit beyond that. But even in those early days in particular, is a total experiment. There was no price, and there wasn't. I wouldn't imagine. I'm sure there was competition, but it wasn't like the competition we have now. So when the price was discovered, and I wouldn't know, I don't know exactly when the first ASIC chip was made, but it was somewhere around 2012, I think. It might have been 2011, but in that time frame, I would consider that like the start of industrialization of ASICs, and really competition really started heating up in mining at that point. But I think, like, these people that, like, so I'm trying to counter this narrative that, like, mining, people are saying mining is centralizing now. It's getting more centralized. And I think it's actually the opposite. Because I think you got to realize, like, pre-Bitcoin and even today, like, the wealth in the world is centralized, right? Like, there's already, people talk about the 1% and the 99%. To be successful in Bitcoin mining, you need access to capital. Like, if you have a lot of capital, you're going to do better just by default than someone who doesn't. You're going to get better discounts. You're going to get economies of scale. Industrial mining crushes home mining in terms of profitability. So like, to think that, like, some of these people seem to think like, oh, mining should be more decentralized, but it's sort of ridiculous notion, because wealth is already so centralized. To think that Bitcoin could already be decentralized is sort of silly, I think. But another aspect of this is, like, if you look at the history of ASICs and the advancement in, from CPU mining to, like, GPU rigs, and I think they were doing like FPGA. I'm not that familiar with that kind of hardware, but we've evolved to ASICs. And then when you look at even ASICs, when you look at the price history, like what ASICs used to cost, they used to be like the capital cost, let's say per kilowatt, like per the power consumption, was rather enormous. Like, and over time, ASIC chips have been getting more and more efficient, but at slower and slower rates. Like, you're getting, like, between, let's say, the Antminer S7 and the S9, you had, I think the S7 was something like 0.25 joules per gigahash or something like that. And then the S9 came out, like, it was only 6 months later or something like somewhere around that time frame. And it was down to 0.1 joules per gigahash. So, like, multiple fold increase in efficiency in only 6 months. And so obviously there's going to be centralizing pressure there, because the people who have access to this technology, it's centralized access, and then it distributes out. But over time, like, we're seeing, like, then it took 2 years for someone to dethrone the S9. It was almost 2 years anyway. Like How Long at least came out with the first public ASIC, the Dragon Mint, that was better, and it wasn't that much better. It was only slightly better. More recently, like Watts Miner has come out with their M10. I haven't seen one yet in person, but I know there's some out there, and there's some on pre-order and that kind of thing, and they're down to something like 0.06 joules per gigahash or something like that. But the point is, like, the rate of efficiency gains is decelerating because we're approaching like our best technology, like we're at our best technology, and we're approaching technological limits. So the technology centralization is going to dissipate because more and more people are more manufacturers are now competing than probably they have been in quite a while, because everyone's hardware is starting to be like on par with each other. And of course, like any industry, like any product like approaches its marginal cost of production. So Bitcoin, certainly mining right now, is such low profitability right now that there's probably not a lot of margins on these units, certainly on the older hardware. So you're getting you're going to see, I think you're going to see more of a commoditization of ASICs, more competition in manufacturers, and so overall more access to the hardware, to the technology for everybody. And then along with that, sort of in parallel with that whole topic of capital costs and technology access is OpEx, like in the operating costs, which is mainly power. Power consumption, of course, is the primary operating cost for mining, and that's already pretty well decentralized. Like you can literally generate power anywhere on the planet with a solar panel, even though I mentioned solar's not that great for mining, but certainly anywhere you have hydro, anywhere you have existing grid power, whether it's powered off of like geothermal or fossil fuels, what have you. It's all over the world. Every country generates their own power to some degree. So the operating side of the whole equation is already decentralized. So when you combine the both, like mining is decentralizing. And so the point of that tweet, and I tweet a lot about that topic, is like I really hate the narrative that mining, like we need to change, like we need to change the proof of work because of mining is centralized. Well, that might be the case. Mining might be somewhat centralized. In fact, like I've probably tweeted myself at some point and talked about, and I mean, all my discussion is online because I don't really know anybody in real life that knows anything about this stuff. But like Bitmain has certainly had, if not direct ownership of like over 51% of the hash rate, they've probably had very close to it, or certainly have influenced close to that. They probably could have used their influence to conduct a 51% attack if they wanted to, and they haven't. So I would say the incentives are working. But regardless, I mean, every market participant needs to be aware, or every merchant in the Bitcoin space needs to be aware of the state of the market. And if you feel like there's a high, if like some of these people that are wanting to change the proof of work, they're obviously feeling that we're under threat. And if that's the case, so they just need to act accordingly and just they're going to need to require more confirmations to feel safe, because you can censor with power, you can censor with hash power, but your defense against that is deeper confirmation depth. So
now maybe you could explain for the newbies, there was some recent talk on, I think it's called SIA coin or SIA, and they were basically resetting the proof of work algorithm and bricking existing hardware. Can you explain for the newbies, what does this do to their coins, quote unquote, game theory and mining over the long run?
Well, I'm very happy to say that I'm not a SIA coin miner. Like I don't really know much about SIA coin. I had heard of it before. I know there's something to do with like a utility token for a decentralized like cloud storage platform. I think that's what they advertise it as. I just got interested in what they're up to because it was actually I remember it was a few months back. I'm interested in the topic of, like a lot of coins actually, like Monero, for example, they try to be ASIC resistant in Ethereum, and they think that is somehow useful. And I've always tried to counter that idea. And with Sia Coin, I respected this article one of the developers wrote. They were talking about their plans to build an ASIC, I think, at the time, and they were talking about ASIC resistance, and effectively agreed with like my own thinking on it, that it's a futile ideal. Like it doesn't really make any sense. And so I sort of respected like what they were doing there, even though I had no interest in like the Sia coin. But recently I was just reading, like I saw it go viral a little bit on Twitter, and I probably bashed it myself, but like what's happened there is that what I know about it is like the Sia community, and mainly, the head developer and their company went and spent a lot of money on building out an ASIC. And then they got beat by Silicon and some other manufacturer. Someone who's, generally they just got beat at building out. They got outcompeted in terms of building out ASICs. And the reaction to this is to brick their competitors' hardware, which is well, I mean, like it's anti-competitive for sure. And it's like, it's sort of, in my opinion, like it completely undermines the confidence you have in that project, like in that coin, for regardless of your, I don't know how you gauge if has consensus to do that. But I guess what I should explain, that how they are doing this is the SIA developers built in a secret circuit into their ASIC that I think they could turn it on or turn it off or something that allows them anyway to keep mining using their ASIC while everyone else can't. And it's just absurd because these competitors like Silicon, I mean, regardless if you think like if they were, mining in secret, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the coin should be agnostic to what's actually how miners are behaving, as long as they're following the rules and building blocks, like valid blocks on top of the protocol. And I don't know how you can decide to just brick everyone who's invested in the coin. And how do they know how many just regular Joes who actually believe in SIA? How do they know how many of them bought ASICs and that kind of thing, and invested themselves in it? And all of a sudden they're just going to say, yeah, well, we're just going to brick your investment. Like, what? I don't know how anyone can agree with that mentality.
Perhaps an example of the play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think maybe if you could maybe wrap up with some thoughts on where you see Bitcoin mining and energy usage going over the next, 2 to 5 years, let's say, medium term.
Yeah. Well,
for example, do you see more usage, more energy?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was looking at the hash rate there the other day, just obviously as a miner, I'm just checking on things every now and then, and it seems to be tapering off a little bit, although it's too early to really tell. But I know that from just based on, if you just take, I sort of just graph things myself and just see like where things are going, and if you take like the historical revenue that you can generate off of a kilowatt, like how much Bitcoin can you make per kilowatt and what's that worth? It's really at all-time lows. And it will always trend downwards because, it's just increased competition. But there will be some threshold, I'm certain of. But I would say difficulty will keep rising as is. Like, there's not really any precedent yet for difficulty dropping too dramatically. Like, I think in the last bear market, it stayed flat pretty good, but it never really dropped. I wouldn't be surprised if it dropped in this bear market. I think there was a lot of like an excessive amount of irrational exuberance from the mining community in terms of like, I mean, some of these S9s were going for absurd prices. I think a lot of capital was invested irrationally at the time. But so it's hard to say if difficulty will correct. I wonder if, like, I know there's some people I like, they're posting they expect Bitcoin to go like the bottom out, in that 4,500 range. If that actually happens, mining will be absurdly unprofitable. So clearly there will have to be a lot of hash power go offline. That, or everyone just gets a hell of a lot more efficient. But yeah, I would say we're definitely going to see more a narrative on this whole mining is wasteful in the future, and hopefully there's more people like myself trying to combat that a little bit. And I do see a lot of people are. So I think I think the logical, if you think for yourself and you take everything into consideration, it's pretty clear that mining isn't wasteful. So I'm not too worried about it. But other than that, I'm interested in seeing where these manufacturers are going to go. Like, I know Bitmain seems to be struggling a bit, so it'll be interesting to see how they perform now over the next year. Like, if they're still, because even now, like, everyone, people are bashing Bitmain, but they actually still have probably the most profitable ASIC. Like, their S9 is priced well enough that you might actually yield a ROI, whereas like some of these new rigs, which are great, like the Watts miner, for the price, like, it's just not worth it. So, like, I haven't bothered. I'm buying another batch right away, and I'm probably just going to buy ant miners, because why would I? I mean, it's just I see it as being more likely to ROI than some of these overpriced stuff. So it'll be fun to see what happens now over the next while, for sure.
Okay, so where can the listeners find you?
You can find me on Twitter at SGBarbour. That's really all that's pretty much it. And I have a website at upstreamdata.ca if you're into oil and gas and that kind of stuff. And if you're into natural gas in any means, maybe take a look and see if it's something you like.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I think it's been a fantastic conversation, and hopefully the listeners have found it very educational as well. So thanks for coming on, Steve.
Hey, it was my pleasure, man. It was a fun time.
Hope you found the conversation with Steve Barbour valuable. I thought it was interesting to understand more about the business model of turning stranded natural gas into Bitcoin mining hashes, as well as Steve's thoughts on mining decentralization. So remember, guys, you can follow me or DM me on Twitter. My handle is @StefanLivera. My DMs are open. And before you go, if you enjoy these podcasts, please support my show by subscribing, giving it a 5-star rating and comment on iTunes, and of course, share the podcast with your friends. Thanks, guys. See you next time.